The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The Trump administration has done something that's making some of his defenders say, see, look, there's really no Russia story here. And what Donald Trump has done is actually nothing, right? But his administration has ordered 60 Russians kicked out of the United States as a response to what's believed to be Russia's involvement in the recent poisoning attack in the U.S. that we talked about last week, maybe even the week before. And to be thorough, Russia still denies involvement in that poisoning incident, but it does seem to be the consensus of sort of Western Europe and many of our allies. And many other countries have done something similar. And the Trump administration has decided that, yes, 60 people are going to have to go. 12 of those 60 people have been identified as Russian intelligence officers stationed at the United Nations in New York City. There's another 48 at the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. So, wow, right? Donald Trump really taking major steps to show that he's tough on Russia in a way that could, oh, well, hold on a second. 14 other European countries already did this and much more. So here's the deal. Yeah, this is probably the toughest thing that Trump has done so far, or that his administration has done so far regarding Russia. But the big picture is that this is peanuts, given what Russia has done, number one, and given what other countries have done with regard to Russia. And most importantly, kicking 60 Russians out of the U.S. does nothing to prevent Russia from influencing the 2018 midterm elections, which, by the way, our intelligence agencies are warning us that Russia is already in the process of doing. So great, kick 60 people out, but what about that election meddling, which the president still, it's unclear if he even believes that that actually took place. So do I think that this is nothing? No, it's something. But if the idea is that Trump will heed counsel on this, what about the counsel of the House and Senate, which overwhelmingly voted for sanctions on Russia, which the administration has failed to fully implement? And the other important factor sort of to bear in mind here is that Trump still hasn't said anything about this, right? The Trump administration has ordered this, and this has no impact whatsoever on Putin and his goals. But most importantly, Trump is effectively silent on this. And his recent silence also is considered to be partially related to the Stormy Daniels allegations that have been made, and the idea that Trump is just staying more silent in general because he doesn't really have anything to say about that, doesn't want to deny because it would be all lies. So Putin's goal here, bigger picture, is not a surprise, right? It's sow chaos in the West, sow chaos among Western democracies, throw the United States into a circumstance where they foment sort of sectarian, I don't know what to call it, political disagreement that escalates into protests and violence if possible, and make the entire world question sort of the validity and strength of American democracy by messing with elections. Putin's ability to do that isn't impacted because 60 people have been kicked out, period. Now, one thing I do want to talk about, I got a few emails from people saying, wait a second, David, it's being reported that these 60 Russians that are getting kicked out are effectively spies, like intelligence officers. If we knew that all along, why were they allowed to be here? Like, why does the U.S. allow Russian spies to be in the U.S.? A lot of people don't realize this, but this is really common in diplomatic and intelligence circles. Intelligence officers are in foreign countries as either diplomats, sometimes they're cultural attaché or legal attaché, and it gives them a cover, right? A diplomatic cover, an ostensible reason to be in the country, but it also can provide diplomatic immunity. So unless they really get caught red-handed in something that is very obviously spying, they don't get in trouble, and it gives them more leeway than just a random visitor to the country would get. And to the extent that relations are sort of normalized between their country and the location where they are. Doesn't mean we all have to be allies, but if there's normalized relations, we tend to sort of look the other way. We also have agents in their country. They're looking the other way there as well. The other element of this that I want to point out, and I mentioned this yesterday in my story about John Bolton, is that I don't want to write off how much of this announcement about 60 Russians might have to do with Trump's new third national security advisor, John Bolton. Now, John Bolton hasn't yet assumed the office. That happens on April 9th. I'm not even saying John Bolton suggested to Trump or to someone in his administration to do this. But what I do know is that John Bolton, who's replacing Trump's second NSA, H.R. McMaster, is both not particularly Russia-friendly and appears to be someone that Trump is going to be paying pretty close attention to. Bolton is known, for lack of a better term, as a Russia hawk, and he might go to Trump and sort of delicately say, listen, I won't meddle too much in what's going on with the Russia stuff, but there are some basic things that you should do. And this, the expelling of 60 Russian intelligence officers, believed Russian intelligence officers, in accordance with what more than a dozen other countries, Western European countries, are doing, this might be one of the things you just sort of want to do. So we'll follow the reaction. We never want to ignore the possibility that Trump at any point might go back on any of this stuff. Or also, we don't want to ignore the possibility that something will be said. They'll say that they're going to be doing something, and then that it just won't be done, and they'll sort of hope that it all gets forgotten, which realistically might happen because there will probably be 100 new scandals before this even is mentioned again during a White House press briefing. And that's the next thing I want to talk about today. Yesterday's White House press briefing managed, well, first of all, it was managed not by Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, but by her deputy, the Deputy Press Secretary Raj Shah. And it got off to a very, very fast start because after the endless lies and the lies about firings and hirings and the lies about so much, Associated Press reporter Zeke Miller straight up said to Raj Shah as soon as he turned it over for questions after a couple-minute comment, why should we believe anything that you tell us at this point? Which is really a pretty obvious question at this point, seen as very controversial and aggressive, but it's just sort of an obvious question. Let's watch. And what I'm most interested in is the just laughable response from Raj Shah here.
Zeke.
Thanks, Raj. And thanks for doing this. First, on Thursday, White House officials were up on this stage, and they said the president would sign the omnibus legislation. On Friday morning, he threatened to veto it, ultimately signed it. 10 days ago, Sarah said that H.R. McMaster had the president's confidence and support and would be leaving. Last Thursday, it was announced that he would be leaving the White House, and about 2.5 weeks ago, the president expressed confidence in his attorneys. And then there was a bit of a shakeup there last week. So could you speak to the White House's credibility? Why should we in this room, and more importantly, the American people, trust anything that this administration is telling them?
Well, our job as a press office and as an administration is to give you the best information that we have available to us, the most accurate information in a timely fashion. Sometimes the dynamics are fluid in any given situation. You mentioned some personnel matters. Facts and circumstances changed. We continue to give you guys the best information that we can as quickly as possible.
So good for Zeke Miller, right? This is a good question. This is the type of question that should be asked. But the next step, if you've got to press them, right? Raj Shah's answer is bogus unless the White House press team is genuinely kept in the dark about what is going on, which is possible. In the Trump administration, anything is possible, but it's sort of hard to believe. To say that they give the most accurate information they have at the time is obviously not believable. The White House press office hasn't been in this level of disarray and disrepair, I would argue, ever. And it goes back to the first day of this administration and Sean Spicer, who has done more to embarrass and discredit the office of the press secretary than any previous press secretary. And it started with his day one pronouncement. I call it the belligerent pronouncement, the coerced pronouncement we now know by Donald Trump, that Donald Trump had the biggest inauguration in the history of the United States, period, end of story. Spicer started his tenure as White House press secretary lying about the weather on Inauguration Day, something that hundreds of thousands of people personally experienced and millions more watched on television. And I also want to point out that not just the lying, but the admitting to lying isn't that rare in the administration. We know that they lie. Donald Trump recently admitted, as I covered, that he lied to foreign leaders, including specifically Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We covered it when it happened. Trump just making up assertions out of thin air about trade with Canada, just made it up. Hope Hicks, Trump's former, I guess like her sixth or seventh, who knows, White House communications director, she testified a few weeks ago that sometimes she would lie to the press for President Donald Trump. Kellyanne Conway concocting the Bowling Green massacre to justify who knows what depraved policy of Donald Trump's that he was pushing at the time, some kind of wall or ban or travel ban or whatever it was. This is what they do, right? So the answer to Zeke Miller's question here is there is no reason why anybody should trust any of these people. They should not be trusted. And even Trump came up once with the bogus lie, just a demonstrable factual lie, that he had the biggest electoral victory in history. He was straight up called out by a reporter in person. And just listen, Trump expressed no remorse. He said, well, that's what somebody told me.
I guess it was the biggest electoral college win since Ronald Reagan.
You said today that you had the biggest electoral margin since Ronald Reagan with 304 or 306 electoral votes. In fact, President Obama got 365 and 2.
Well, I'm talking about Republican.
President Obama 332 and George H.W. Bush 426 when he won as president. So why should Americans trust?
Well, no, I was given that information. I don't know. I was just given. We had a very, very big margin.
I guess my question is, why should Americans trust you when you accuse the information they receive of being fake when you're providing information that's...
Well, I don't know. I was given that information. I've seen that information around.
Yeah, I was thinking that a lot of people aren't familiar with that one, but it's bad. There is only one way in which what Raj said is true. Shah said that the press office provides the most accurate information at the time. It's possible they have no clue what's going on, right? The press office may genuinely have no reason to think that H.R. McMaster and Rex Tillerson are about to be fired, even almost as they are being fired, because they're not being told that it's going on. And that's the one other interpretation of this. And I don't know whether that's true. That would signal a whole host of other problems going on within the White House. Maybe it's something that we will someday learn about. But hey, I wish there were more follow-up, but good for Zeke Miller for asking the question. We can only hope there's more of this coming from the press corps. I'm on Twitter at @DPacman. Show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Quick break, back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Thomas Radford. Thomas, thank you. We depend on the support of members who sign up at davidpakman.com/membership, something that can be done at a 40% discount if you want, using the coupon code VOTESOON18. Not only are our new members really important to what we do, but the people that have been supporting us for years are also a huge part of why we've been able to grow the program to where we are now. And I want to thank sustaining member Declan McElroy, who has been with us since November of 2011, approaching 7 years of David Pakman Show membership. Join both of them at davidpakman.com/membership. We have been covering the chaos at Facebook that has sort of stemmed from the misuse and release of data for 50 million users in connection with Cambridge Analytica, which was Donald Trump's opposition research, data mining, and digital strategy company during the 2016 election. We've covered all of that stuff. I guess in the last week, most of it has broken. Founder and CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, was interviewed by CNN's Laurie Siegel a few days ago. He said he's sorry about what happened, that it was really a major, major mistake, big ball drop by Facebook. And part of the blowback to this has been that the British Parliament has asked that Mark Zuckerberg go there and talk about what the hell happened. And Zuckerberg is now effectively refusing. Instead, even though he was the one requested, whose presence was requested, Facebook is sending one or a few senior executives at the company, even though, again, UK Parliament said, we want Mark Zuckerberg to show up here. He's the founder, he's the CEO, he's the one who ultimately has to answer for this. And the explanation for Facebook is as follows. Facebook fully recognizes the level of public and parliamentary interest in these issues and support your belief that these issues must be addressed at the most senior levels of the company by those in an authoritative position to answer your questions. As such, Mr. Zuckerberg has personally asked one of his deputies to make themselves available to give evidence to the committee. That's a letter from Rebecca Stimson, who runs public policy for Facebook in the UK. UK Parliament is saying, okay, yeah, that's really great, but we want to hear from Mark Zuckerberg. We'll even set up a video link if necessary. Maybe he'd be willing to do it by like Facebook video chat or something like that. So it's unclear what's next. And I don't find this at all shocking. Zuckerberg, in his interview with Laurie Siegel on CNN, said something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing here, I'd be glad to appear if I'm the right person, which was very clearly setting himself up to later say, hey, you know what? Turns out I'm not the right person. We're going to send somebody else. And the effect is that the PR is really building here. The bad press is really building. Facebook has had, they have a massive user base. So Facebook's not disappearing anytime soon. But they're starting to see a wave of people getting off of Facebook. There are how-to guides going viral about how to totally close your Facebook account if you want to that are popping up all over the internet. There's advertisers pulling away from Facebook. Mozilla has bailed. Germany's second biggest bank is out. American auto parts company Pep Boys is out. That's just the start of the list. And Mozilla is even going further. Mozilla launched an extension to their browser called Facebook Container, which will isolate the Facebook identity of the user from the rest of their web activity, preventing some of that tracking that follows you throughout the internet, which then is sort of reflected in highly targeted Facebook ads to you. So Facebook has lost $100 billion in market cap from stock market declines. They're having a problem. Now, that gets us to the decision to not send Zuckerberg, right? From a PR perspective, unless you think Zuckerberg's appearance will be so bad that it will do more damage to Facebook than the improvement in the perception of the company that it might cause, then you should send him, right? If you're choosing not to send Zuckerberg when the request is for him specifically, after all the bad press, that means that either Zuckerberg himself or Facebook believe that if they send him, we're going to end up in an even worse position than where we are now, which is scary because it's already pretty bad. So I'm curious as to what the logic is. The truth is that even Facebook's deputies haven't done too well in the past. I don't have the video handy here, but there was an incident where a Facebook representative went before the Singapore parliament and answered questions. And if they send the same arrogant clown, I don't remember the guy's name, I can see why there would be hesitation to send anybody at all. But I get it. I mean, Zuckerberg's not experienced in dealing with negative PR and adversarial interviews. He's the big vision guy. He shows up for the new product announcements and for talking about the trajectory of Facebook over the next 2 years. It's very possible that if you send Zuckerberg in, he gets crushed under questioning.
Maybe, but he should be able to defend his own company under pressure. He should be able to testify before the UK Parliament, I think. And it's kind of a shame, I guess. I mean, he was such a rising star, maybe like a 2020 darling, worth about $60 billion. And now it seems like he's only going to go down from here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about the 2020 stuff, but I can't imagine this guy's going to be the next president of the United States. that I can tell you at this point. And we'll see where this shakes out. I mean, the first week after the initial hit of bad PR can make it sort of hard to predict where this is going. But you're seeing user abandonment. You're also seeing advertiser abandonment. I'm confident Facebook is a massive, massive company. I'm confident they will get through this. The question is to what degree will their reputation be affected? Last night, I decided to turn on the TV for a few minutes. I basically don't watch news shows or political shows. I've talked about this before. I've always got like some Netflix shows that I'm watching. And yesterday I watched, what did I watch? I watched an episode of Hostages, great Israeli show. Finished watching an episode of that with my girlfriend. And I said, let's just see what's happening in the news, right? Like what's happening on Fox News, what's happening on MSNBC, what's happening on CNN. I turned to CNN, which by and large has been doing a mix of good reporting on the Trump administration combined with some salacious stuff that's less relevant. Certainly a much better option than Fox News for sure. and I see Anderson Cooper, who recently interviewed Stormy Daniels on 60 Minutes, sitting at his news desk with legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin, Michael Avenatti, who's the lawyer for adult film actress Stormy Daniels, as well as the lawyer for Trump's lawyer. So Trump has a lawyer, Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen is in such hot water now as a result of the Stormy Daniels thing and the non-disclosures that he has retained a lawyer named David Schwartz. As I've told you before, Trump's lawyer has not lawyered up here because of the trouble that that he believes Trump is in. He's lawyered up because he potentially is in trouble, tells us how bad things are going. This was one of the most embarrassing and pointless, nearly half-hour segments that I have ever seen on corporate media. Two lawyers yelling at each other the way they might do 30 seconds before turning to fisticuffs in a bar, right? Michael Cohen's lawyer, David Schwartz, is on the most fundamental level a complete and total embarrassment. His mere presence on the network is shameful. Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, he's known as this really savvy legal operator. He completely embarrassed himself with his behavior, stooping to the same level as David Schwartz, making fun of Schwartz's weight at one point. How does it count as sort of legal exploration of the merits of a case to ridicule the fact that the other lawyer is heavy, right? I mean, it is absolute and total embarrassment. And I guess Anderson Cooper and Jeffrey Toobin did what they could to kind of control the situation, but CNN should certainly be embarrassed about this as well. I'm going to play only a few clips for you here. It's just some random stuff. It's all like this, nearly a half hour's worth. Take a look.
What's the first thing that you think of? I got to go to my Pilates class. That's the very first thing that I think of when someone comes up to me and threatens me with my daughter. Anyone who has a daughter knows you go right to the police. It's complete nonsense.
She said she didn't go to the police because she was scared and she walked into the room.
That's why you go
and
to
her
the
hands were
police.
shaking. To the notion that he's saying that it's defamatory.
File a lawsuit. Look, the majority of Americans.
You got the letter yesterday.
So wait a minute. Last time, you didn't let me talk. This time,
I'm letting you talk.
No, this time you are going to let me talk. Otherwise, otherwise we're going to have to get the defibrillator out for you, and I'm concerned about it. So let me
go
talk
for
to you.
it. Go for it.
All right, I almost brought it. I almost brought it today. I almost brought the defibrillator.
Please go for it.
All right, look. The American people saw last night.
I think that's also kind of a fat joke, right? Like, is it because the guy's so heavy that if he keeps talking, he might need to be defibrillated? I don't even know. A half hour of this stuff. Here's just another random sampling from later on in the program.
She sat in an interview for 2 hours or thereabouts, and she faced the tough questions, and she answered them. And the American people saw those answers, saw how she answered the questions, and I think 90% of America.
90%. Everyone's scratching their heads. What was that interview?
Wait a minute. Let me finish.
Are you saying that it was Michael Cohen who was in Las Vegas by the Pilates place? Are you saying it was him personally?
Of course it wasn't Michael Cohen.
Well, you said that all along. You've been saying that.
I didn't think you'd say that.
By the way, you've been showing a CD.
You know what? There's a reason why God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth.
What about your fake lie detector test?
You're supposed to listen.
What about your phony lie detector test? Where was the galvanic spit?
Persuasive legal arguments being made, right? These are two lawyers I would hire right away. And it's very easy to say it's one person instigating here. These are attorneys representing people who couldn't be more in the public eye, and they go on national media, and this is how they comport themselves on national television. Here's just another few seconds of this nonsense.
Can I just now to talk about the Mueller, to talk about some fantasy criminal indictment? You don't know what you're talking about. It just keeps coming out of your mouth. You have no idea what you're talking about.
Interrupt this.
Look at you laughing. What do you speak to Mueller? Can I speak to you? You know exactly what they're doing.
Can I just raise?
What you're talking about.
All right, and just one more clip here, and this is sort of the epitome of the entire thing.
Let's talk about Michael Cohen. What kind of man this is? This is the kind of guy who claimed in connection with that story that there's no such thing as spousal rape. This is a legal genius. Right. Completely false. The guy doesn't even know the law. He's a thug. Your friend is a thug.
Well, thank you.
A thug.
That's $1 million.
No, that's $3 million.
$1 million. You know what? You're a thug. Anyone who would come on here.
Wait a second.
Anyone, you see, anyone.
By
the way,
he's a thug.
By the way, you doctored your lie detector test. Okay, no galvanic skin response.
This is an utter embarrassment. As far as the substance, the only substance came from really specific questions from CNN legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin, and it exposed that Cohen's attorney really doesn't have good answers to a whole host of questions. But it doesn't matter because the entire thing was just an embarrassment. Who at CNN thinks this is a good idea? How is it responsible counsel? And forget about Schwartz, right? Schwartz is there merely to muddle the water. That's all he wants to do because Michael Cohen is not in a good position. But Stormy Daniels and her attorney presumably are there to make her seem more credible, to explain the legal underpinnings of what's going on here. What is the upside for Avenatti to appear in a setting like this and to be completely unable to control himself? It is pathetic and embarrassing every step of the way. And this is where I go off to the point where I say, is this just all we can expect from a network like this? Because they've done some good stuff.
Yeah, should Anderson Cooper have done a better job at facilitating that debate, or did he just let it go because it's good television after all?
Is it though? I mean, the thing is, I don't know that it is actually good, because when you've got 4 people talking at once, it almost doesn't matter who it is or what they're saying. It just doesn't work. And I get to my bottom line on the story, which is I think that this is a legitimate story, not because Trump had sex with someone, but because the payoff might have been illegal, because of the concerning pattern of lies and manipulation of women, all of that stuff. But we're not dealing with any of the real substance when it's 4 people talking over each other for a half hour and acting literally like school children. One of the worst moments I've seen on CNN in a very, very long time. Things have not been going well for right-wing news website Breitbart of Trump advisor Steve Bannon fame. Their ad revenue has been falling off a cliff. More and more companies have been pulling ad from the website. There's been a really great social media shame campaign to get advertisers to pull money from Breitbart. And there's now a new allegation against Breitbart, and it relates to the failed candidacy of serial accused child sex assaulter Roy Moore in Alabama's special election. A lawyer representing one of Moore's accusers has come forward and said that some of Roy Moore's supporters offered him money to drop the accuser as a client. Now, how does it involve Breitbart? Part of the offer was that the lawyer would make a specific statement about dropping the accuser as a client, which would be released only and directly to Breitbart News. He would also be paid $10,000 and get the pleasure, I guess, of being introduced directly to Stephen Bannon. So this has immediately raised questions about why did he have to go to Breitbart with a statement as part of the agreement? Why would anyone even think to include that? Was anyone involved in trying to pay off the attorney to drop his client working with or connected to Breitbart in the first place? And the bigger question is the allegation credible? And I don't really have trouble believing that Breitbart and Moore supporters would try to hurt the accusers by getting rid of their legal representation. The only part that strikes me as less believable is that they think they could buy the lawyer with just $10,000, right? You would imagine that professional bribers know you've got to offer more than 10 grand to a lawyer to get them to drop such a notable client who's in the public eye. And for what it's worth, the people named in the article as being involved in reaching out to the lawyer haven't denied doing this. They've simply said, we did not do anything wrong or illegal, which is basically like saying, yeah, we did it and it was perfectly fine to do. And the projection here is just stunning, because you'll remember that when the Washington Post first broke some of the stories of these accusers of Roy Moore, you had people on the right who were saying the Washington Post paid the women to make up the stories. Now of course, there was no evidence of that. Now we learn that it actually might have been the right trying to pay off the lawyers representing the accusers so that they would drop the cases. And it is absolutely pathetic and disgusting if true. There's a very clear silver lining here, though, which is that Breitbart really seems to be in disarray and on its way down. That is a really great media story. It remains to be seen if they ultimately meet their total demise. But the latest allegations that they were directly involved in this, truly and absolutely disgusting. And we'll continue to follow what ultimately happens with Breitbart.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by David Weber, who's a law professor at Boston University, also author of the newly published book, The Rise of the Working Class Shareholder, Labor's Last Best Weapon. David, this is super interesting to me because we've talked for years about how the stock market really only touches, first of all, only a fraction of all Americans in total, and disproportionately those who hold the overwhelming majority of shares of stock. And so in one sense, following the stock market is not really a great way of sort of sussing out how the economy at large is doing and sort of how the average worker is doing. Your book takes an interesting approach where it looks at the concept of shareholder activism and also pension funds to discuss how actually there can be more influence over what's happening in those boardrooms from the average worker. So first, lay it out sort of more generally. What are we talking about here?
We're talking about shareholder power that really exists in two basic forms. It's from public pension funds, which are large funds sponsored by a state or by a city that those employees of the state or the city contribute their retirement funds to. And the other is, private sector union funds. The larger of the two are really the public sector, public employee pension funds. And what's happened in the last 10, 15 years is that a lot of those funds have started becoming very active as shareholders, using their shareholder power in a lot of really exciting and I think productive ways, in ways that other shareholders don't use that power. And I think that that power can be used for the benefit of all of us, and indeed already has. And I think it can also be used to help workers as workers too.
So let's go through some examples sort of how this can work. For people who hold some shares of stock, like for example, I've talked about how I've owned Tesla stock for a long time. I'll disclose that whenever we talk about Tesla on the program. I don't own a lot of shares. So when I get that yearly or whatever letter that says, hey, there's some shareholder votes going on, you should participate, I hold such a tiny amount of stock individually that my vote is almost literally worthless. However, if you have a lot of, for example, public employees that individually might not own many shares, but in total do, what are the sorts of things that they can start to do?
Okay, so a lot of big public pension funds have done a number of great things in the space of corporate governance, for example. So pension funds were involved in getting say on pay to be adopted, which was for the first time giving shareholders a chance to actually vote on the pay of senior executives, CEOs, and the like. They've also been involved in efforts to create a rule that now requires this year for the first time the CEO's pay to be reported relative to the average or median worker's pay. They've also been really involved in improving shareholder voting. You know, shareholder voting has long been a joke, and not just because lots of us do what you do, David, which is many of us who are individual investors, because of our stakes are so small, we rarely get very involved with shareholder voting. We rarely pay attention to what's going on. But a lot of these big public pension funds have gotten involved and have done some great things. Let me give you an example. The New York City, for a long time, there was this, it sounds like an archaic rule, but imagine if someone running for president, imagine if Donald Trump, when he seeks re-election, could just put his own name on the ballot in ballot booths. Somebody else could run against him, but only his name would be in the ballot booth. If someone wanted to challenge him, they'd have to print up their own ballots, mail it to millions of voters, and get them to bring it to the polls. Well, we would think that's flatly unconstitutional. It would give a huge advantage to the incumbent. Well, that's exactly what's been going on forever in corporate elections. You want to run against a board member? Go right ahead. But you have to print up all your own ballots and mail them out to investors. It's very expensive. No one can afford to do it. Well, the New York City pension funds recently fought and won the right to have some shareholders actually put competing names on the ballot. So that's just one example of how these pension funds have helped to transform things to make greater accountability inside corporations to shareholders and to people like these pension funds too.
There is some significant limitation here insofar as pension funds in general are are less and less frequently even available to employees, and union membership, of course, is a tiny fraction in the United States of what it once was. So those are sort of like overarching limiting factors here, aren't they?
They certainly are, and where you have it today, most of this is what's still left in the public sector. The traditional pensions, we all know what's happened. Most traditional pensions in the private sector, big corporations, have disappeared. And what they have been replaced with are 401ks basically, which are individually managed retirement accounts. And so, but where we still have some traditional pensions left is in the public sector, the California Public Employees Retirement System, New York, etc. They still have these big traditional pensions. And so rather than being millions of individually tiny investors, they're actually large investors who can wield some serious clout. And one of the things that I worry about is that these guys have used that clout in ways that have benefited lots of us because we are not in a great position to organize and to speak out. I compare to me, a traditional pension is like a union and a 401k is like right to work, where if you've got your individual retirement account, you're very weak, you're very powerless.
Yeah, I mean, so that people know, I mean, you also have written about the pretty critical articles of about the concept of the 401k. So can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, I've spoken to my audience many times about the sort of hidden way in which so-called investment managers and fund managers continually pull money out of people's investment funds, whether they do well or do poorly. That's only one part of the problem with 401ks, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, there's been a lot of research on this now, and there's been some very interesting recent articles in which many of the folks who were involved in creating with the 401k have basically said, look, it's just not working. It's not working the way we hoped, expected, or that was designed to do. There are a lot of problems with it. Some of it is that a lot of us are individual investors, and we may not make the best choices for ourselves. And the other thing is we may not even be offered decent choices. There are many companies that offer 401ks to employees, and what's available in your retirement plan is often, frankly, a lot of garbage. You have choices between a number of plans that have very high fees, okay, and that don't necessarily perform all that well. You know, there are a very limited number, basically most folks, I mean, sort of the gold standard is to be in an S&P 500 index fund, which is and a low fee one. Lots of folks don't even have an opportunity to invest in something like that because it's just not available. So what you get is a situation where lots of these funds are loaded up with basically mediocre to bad investments. And so even if you are contributing to them, you may not be doing all that well, and there are many folks. There's increasing concern that people who are in these 401ks are not going to have enough money to retire on when the day comes.
Sort of a catch-22 though, because if you are working somewhere that has a 401k match, even though you are paying what in by any other standard would be exorbitant fees, you're still in the net benefiting because that's the only way that you can get that employer match, and you're kind of left with pretty bad options one way or the other.
Well, look, one thing I do want to be clear is, it's better usually it's better even to be contributing to a mediocre 401k than not to be contributing at all.
Of course.
People should be saving for retirement. But yes, it is a concern that these plans aren't what they should be. They aren't what they would be if, a powerful institutions were negotiating on our behalf, some of these deals. And you're right, getting the employer match is a good thing to do. It's a rational thing to do. I would totally favor that. But even with that, and even with some changes, there are real worries about the future of retirement on these things. But I do want to circle back, if I could, to the point we started out with initially, which is, there's sort of two sides of the coin. One is the question of how much do you have to retire on? But the other comes back to this role that these big pension funds have played as basically market policemen, not just for ourselves, but not just for themselves, but actually for everybody else. I'll give you another example from earlier. A lot of these big pension funds have been involved in bringing the most important securities fraud cases or deal cases. If you look at the Enron case or the WorldCom case, if you look at some of the cases that have been brought against Wells Fargo, when there are issues like that that come up, some of these pension funds have stepped forward and have taken the lead in bringing those suits. And there's a lot of evidence that shows that these big traditional state and local pension funds, when they take a role, they get better results for all of us, and they pay lower attorney's fees, which is good for us in these suits. So I'm just worried about this loss of this market policeman if you break all these guys up into a bunch of individually managed accounts.
Last thing on this, to the extent that the priorities of the pension fund sort of mirror those of their constituents, then we can say, hey, this is a good thing. But is there any reason to think that that's guaranteed? I mean, couldn't you have a situation where the pension funds are using that power in a way that's not quite so good for their constituents?
There have been instances where political leaders who are hostile to pension funds have used them in ways that hurt their own workers. There was an example from, this goes back a little bit, but in 2004, after Jeb Bush was running for re-election as governor of Florida, and then the teachers' unions in that state were opposing him. And then after he was reelected, the Florida pension fund wound up investing in a company that privatizes lots of public school services. So there have been examples over the years where sometimes a hostile politician gets in there and tries to use it and does end up using these funds in ways that can undermine worker interests. That's why I think it's very important for workers to be aware of these issues and to be looking out to make sure that the trustees of their retirement funds are using them in ways that advance their interests and not harm their interests. It is an issue, but it's one that I think can and should be dealt with.
We've been speaking with Boston University law professor David Weber. The book is The Rise of the Working Class Shareholder, Labor's Last Best Weapon. David, thank you so much for talking to me about this today.
Thanks very much for having me on the show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I've been talking to you about the importance of the census for a while, and it's not a sexy topic. It's not very exciting, but it's really, really important. So that's why I've been talking about it, and I've told you about the Trump administration's sort of indirect or maybe direct attempt to sabotage the census by just underfunding the Census Bureau at every opportunity. And this really matters because it determines not only how districting is done and how many representatives each state gets, but it also impacts distribution of funds. It impacts representation of minority groups and minority voters. It's a really important thing. And the Trump administration is now further trying to torpedo the census. The Commerce Department and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross have announced yesterday that the 2020 census will ask people if they are American citizens. This is, of course, supported by Attorney General Jeff Sessions and, of course, supported by Donald Trump. And it is an unmitigated disaster. This will do a couple of different things. Number one, you ask people about their citizenship on the census, and it is going to hold down the response rates from people who are concerned about their immigration status, meaning that they will be underrepresented in the census, and you can imagine how hugely impactful that is. When you ask about citizenship on the census, you are doing something that is also redundant and not necessary. There's this thing called the American Community Survey, which asks about citizenship already. The census hasn't asked about citizenship since 1950. You have a president who ran on and continues to threaten to do deportations, to round people up humanely, as he likes to say, to build walls. And then you put a citizenship question on the census. You think you're going to get accurate data in that way? If you want to skew the survey to undercount minorities and immigrants for political gain, this is exactly what you do. You put a citizenship question on the census, which will make it so that anyone concerned about immigration status simply does not participate. And now it's becoming part of a bigger strategy. It's a more coherent strategy now to torpedo the census. Underfund the census at a high level, and then add a question about citizenship. Not every state is taking this lying down. California is suing over this decision. Very good example, by the way, California, of a blue state with a high immigrant and minority population that will get screwed out of a ton of money if you include this question in the census. And one of the reasons that the Trump administration, Wilbur Ross, whoever, one of the reasons that they're giving for putting this question back in is, hey, we had this question in the census from the 1800s to 1950. Can you imagine using that logic for anything else? Hey, they had slavery during that time. We should put that back in. They had legal discrimination during that time. Let's add that back in, as if that's a reason to do things. The fact that we used to do something can't be, in a modern Western democracy, supposedly modern, supposedly a democracy, a reason for doing something like this. And it's actually really representative of what conservatism wants, right? We've talked about this before. On many issues, we say conservatives want to go back to the 1950s. On some issues, they want to go back to the 1850s altogether. And this includes, take your choice of issues where they want to regress, whether it's women's rights or LGBT rights or many, many others. So this is, it's one of those ideas that to the Trumpist right will sort of sound like, yeah, why would anyone have a problem with that? If you're here legally, then you have nothing to be afraid of. And if you're not here legally, you shouldn't be here at all. And you shouldn't be part of the census, so we don't have to worry about it. This is a way to shift funds from big blue states, including states like California and New York, to red states with lower populations that will be proportionately or in proportion more represented by the census if you add this question. Hopefully California succeeds in their lawsuit and other states follow. Let's go to your voicemails, 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail that came in. Let's take a listen to it.
David, why don't you didn't speak accurately on this topic. It was about astrology.
Oh, boy.
You said you don't believe in astrology, but that's not the truth. The truth is you don't know anything about astrology, do you? You don't know what the moon and other planets' positions are at birth means to a person, do you? Do you know what ascendant means? I doubt it. You don't know. You confuse daily horoscope crap with real astrology. Daily horoscopes are entertainment for the non-thinking. Daily horoscopes are nothing more than Chinese fortune cookies.
Okay.
You should have said, I know nothing about astrology and I don't believe in it. That would be accurate, right? Right.
I love this. This is the same argument that the gun fetishists make. They go, do you even know what AR stands for? And some people will say, I think it stands for assault rifle. They go, no, it doesn't. You have no right to talk about gun safety legislation because you don't know anything about what guns actually are. It doesn't matter whether I know what a planet or whatever being ascendant is, or Mercury being in retrograde or whatever. What I do know is the history of astrology, how it started. Really, astrology and astronomy sort of came from the same source. They split at a certain point. Astronomy became actual science, which allows us to learn about outer space, planetary bodies, and astrophysics and so much else. Well, not so much astrophysics, actually, but we could argue that it sort of came from that. And astrology is a scam, and I don't even want to call it a pseudoscience. It is a non-science. There is no evidence whatsoever that people's personalities and daily lives are influenced by the positions of planets at birth or whether Mercury is in retrograde or whatever. But is it even worth wasting my time? Because when you hear a voicemail from someone like this, it's like an anti-vaxxer. It's like a committed Trumpist. It's like a committed gun fetishist. Is it really worth wasting our time? I think the value of it is just in hearing that these types of folks exist, and they will turn on you immediately as soon as you don't toe the line. We've got a great bonus show coming up for you today. We'll talk about how the Pentagon plans to spend some extra cash that they've got. I will tell you about a man who told a woman that he had been poisoned and the antidote was sex. Wow. And we will also talk about an Army vet who served 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan and has now been deported to Mexico. Get the bonus show by becoming a member at davidpakman.com/membership. You can also sign up at patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. Make a $5 a month contribution. You'll also get instant access to the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.